will be conducting today's session. He is currently working at a startup called Pathrise. He's also a very experienced mentor to a lot of students. I think some of his students are actually here today. And lovely that we can see a lot of you on a weekend here. We're also doing the session on Discord. But yeah, glad that you guys could actually join it live here. I'm super excited. I just got like a quick rundown on what he's going to be talking about today, and that got me super excited. I'm pretty sure you all will have a lot of things that you can take back home. As usual, whenever you're doing these sessions, because like this is a free event that Zoshua is doing, right? And he's doing it for all of us. So would love to see the feedback post the session. Please put it up on Discord, on the main channel, design channel, wherever. Tag him, give him some clout. Just tell him how it went. And yeah, awesome, Joshua. It's 6 p.m. Over to you whenever you are ready.
Thank you. So, hi everyone. I'm Zosh. Okay, you can call me Zoshua, Zosh, or even Colah. Anything works. Okay, and welcome to today's session. Primarily, the focus of my session is to go ahead and give you all an introduction to the field of UX design. So, I had an opportunity to go ahead and learn a bit more about you all yesterday and just understand your interest in UX design from Elson. And the overall session goal is just to be a conversation where I'm going to be walking you through basically what the journey of a UX designer really looks like. And more importantly, also break some of the misconceptions people have about the field. And I thought, what better way to do it than actually talking about the misconceptions I had when I got started in the field of design. So basically, that's kind of what the agenda of today's session is, to go ahead and break the misconceptions people have about the field of UX design, and then actually tell you what UX design really is, and hope that you potentially get a better idea of the value also which UX design can bring to an organization. And then towards the end, we'll also go ahead and spend some time, discussing potentially how you can learn design, and we'll also go ahead and answer the questions you may have. At any given point of time, please feel free to, like raise your hand or like interrupt me and ask me a question. You can also use the Q&A feature, which is there on Zoom, or the chat. Anything works. Feel free to ask questions. It's a conversation. It's not like a lecture per se. So please feel free to, converse with me. So let's go ahead and get started with the session. So one thing which I want to ensure that everyone is aware of is, like, maybe you've heard of this field called UX design, or as some people like to call it today, product design. Okay. And many a times they want to know, it's like, is this a field for me? Right. And that's really important when you enter this presentation per se, like which I'm giving today, is like, who is this presentation really for? So if you've ever been considering a career in design, right, and you've ever been thinking, oh, should I become a UX designer or graphic designer or interaction designer per se, or a visual designer, or maybe a service designer or a product designer? You've seen these terms being thrown, you've read a bit about it, maybe on an article, or maybe you've not read about it. Or maybe you explored it a bit more and you began to hear a few more like different types of designers, right? At the end of the day, there are so many different fields of design that can get very confusing. And you're not really sure sometimes as to whether you're learning in the right place. So is this presentation for you relevant today? And the answer is yes. If you're looking to be a designer, okay, this presentation is actually going to help you, because we're not just going to be discussing just the field of UX design, but design as a whole and where it's actually moving towards in today's day and age. So it's not just going to focus upon UX design as it's by itself, but actually on how we've entered this field of UX and why is it so relevant today, and why many designers are usually going ahead and doing UX in some form, whether even doing graphic design or even doing print advertising per se. So let's go ahead and get started. So a bit more about me. Who exactly am I? I'm basically a designer. Okay. I'm also a founder, a teacher, and I love sports. I love cricket as well as football. And I get to have an opportunity many a times to help people grow in this field of design per se. And I've been doing this since 2017. And I've actually been able to help quite a lot of people. And the reason why I continuously help people in the field of design is because I want them to have really nice careers and find happiness just the way how I found happiness in the field of UX design. And that actually makes me feel really fulfilled per se. So the agenda for today, we'll be going ahead and getting started with my journey. We'll actually talk about the misconceptions people tend to have about the field of UX and how that actually, I was the same kind of like place per se when I was getting started. And then we'll transition to actually understanding the goal of what UX is, what does it stand for, and then actually talk about the business value. And then towards the end, we'll talk about how to learn UX, and I'll be happy to do a Q&A session as well, where you can ask questions. So moving forward, okay, how many of y'all know anything about design out here? Feel free to like raise your hand if you know anything about design, or unmute yourself and say, hey, I know something about design, and tell us what you know. Okay, so I see one person says raise the hand. Yes, I think it's Team Avlo and Meta. They've said they know something about design. I see there's Aniket, Shalini, Himanshu. Let's have Arushi share a bit about her like experience with design. So Arushi, you mentioned that you know a bit about design. Would you feel comfortable sharing with everyone out here what you know about the field per se? Okay, I don't know if Arushi is having a network connection issue.
I don't think they can speak since it's a webinar.
Oh,
they'll have to type.
okay.
So you guys will have to
No
type
worries.
in the chat. Cool.
Okay, so I can see a lot of hands raised. I can see 12 hands out of 87 people, like they've raised their hands. Okay, quite a few of you all know a bit about design, and quite a few of you all don't know anything about design. Okay, and the first thing I want to let you all know is that it's completely a-okay if you know nothing about this field. Okay, because in fact, when I got started, in this field of design, I knew nothing. Okay, I knew nothing about the word design. I didn't even know how to draw. Okay, I always thought I was a terrible artist. I loved drawing cartoons in my like rough book, but I was a terrible artist. Only I thought I was an artist. My mom thought I was terrible. Okay, and I did not even know what the word UI UX meant. When I even took this class on it for the first time, I just dived in and I was like, let's see what it has. And this actually gets started with a short journey of me going ahead and traveling to the University of Washington, and basically from there my career started to grow. So what was my journey at the University of Washington, all the way in Seattle in the United States? It started off with this small website I had discovered before I went to university. It was called codrops.com, and it had this beautiful collection of these animated websites with beautiful animations, and I would go ahead and explore them. And I always had one question: how can I make something like this? I want to make animated websites. It looks beautiful. How can I do the same? And the more I kept learning about it, the more interested I became. And I learned per se that, you need to know a bit of Photoshop and you need to know a bit about coding. And I said, you know what, therefore I need to pursue a career in computer science. That was what my limited knowledge made me understand per se, with my limited research when I was, 14 or 15 years old. And I made a decision saying I want to study computer science. I wrote that exactly in my essay as well. I'm here to, I want to come here, study computer science to build beautiful applications and websites. It was never about me being fascinated by the algorithms. It was always about, I want to make something which looks beautiful. And as soon as I entered the college, okay, my friend in fact told me, is like, why don't you take this course with this guy called Brian Fling? He's supposed to be the world's leading designer. He's teaching a course on mobile app and OS design. You'll like it. And I said, that sounds fantastic. It's my first quarter. Why shouldn't I pursue something which I want to pursue? And as soon as I entered this classroom, Brian, who is a fantastic teacher and a guide per se, he starts to throw down these words which just make me feel like this. Okay, because I've gone ahead and entered an advanced class unknowingly. It's has a 400 number next to it, but unknowingly I've just dived in, and my eyes are very big. And I'm like, whoa, I expected something about coding and, like Photoshop, which I had a bit of familiarity with. And this guy's using all these definitions of words, and he's talking about accessibility, and he's talking about content management, and he's throwing these words all around the classroom continuously. And somehow I was able to, manage through and at least start to make a few prototypes. And as you can see out here, my initial designs at that time looked terrible. But at least it was a good way for me to get started, because I actually was slightly interested, in learning more about what he was sharing. He had all these definitions. So I began to read more about it and slowly understanding what he was sharing with me, okay, in the entire lecture hall of all these senior students with one freshman, just like I would say, fish out of water. I was finally able to improve my work a bit. And towards the end of the quarter, we actually made quite a bit of improvement. Was with a small team. And while there's still room for improvement in it today, it was a great first start for me, because it actually broke down a lot of, misconceptions I had about the field. For example, Brian in that class told me that, hey, you know what? designers actually, when you're designing mobile apps and designing websites, they're not really ever coding per se. They're using this app called Sketch. At that time, Sketch, was the top tool. And I was like, what? There's no tool like, like we're not going to be coding this app out. He's like, no, that's the role of a software engineer, not the role of a UX designer. And I then asked him, I was like, what's this? Everyone keeps throwing out these words of UX design, interaction design. What exactly do they do? And he said, we basically focus on crafting experiences, Joshua. We don't focus on, going ahead on focusing on the nitty gritty details behind the algorithms. That's what the software engineer would usually be doing. And he said, we focus instead on what can the product be and how can the product help the user who will be using it at the end of the day. And it was this mindset which he put into me, which made me realize that it's less of, going ahead and focusing on learning the best algorithms. And therefore, I, in fact, immediately decided to change my career trajectory, where I said, originally, I'm going to be getting a degree in computer science. I said, you know what? It's not going to be where I need to go. And I decided to instead pursue the other degree in the university called informatics, where I would actually get an opportunity, to practice more of this. And me being me, went ahead and took a lot more, senior level classes. And by the time it was my first year, I actually had a lot of great fun. In fact, using the skills Brian had taught to me, I was able to even win a startup weekend where I again learned that, code is not the most important thing. And it's the actual product you're creating matters a lot more, and the experience which you're creating, which matters. And then I finally was able to go ahead and start to build out my career from there. And what exactly was a career for me was primarily going ahead and growing my careers, first starting off as a consultant, helping out small design agencies and startups, as well as going ahead and founding a few of my own organizations. And then because of that talent which people had discovered in me, they said, Zosh, you're really good at, your work. You've been climbing up the ladder in UX pretty quickly. Why don't you come and teach? And I got a chance to teach as well. And now today I work at Pathrise. And primarily it was this journey from UW to Pathrise, which I'm now going to move forward with discussing with you to show you what actually a designer does versus what they don't really do. So now you are aware that designers don't really code. So what do they really do? For example, when I first joined advertising and research, it was a small medical agency. Okay, they're number one leading medical agency, but a very small team. And they're focusing on making medical advertisements. And they said, Zoshua, here's a portfolio site. Okay, this is what we give to all our clients to take a look at. Is there a way you can make people who visit our site, more interested in us? Can you elevate our brand? And that was a very interesting, challenge which he gave to me. And at first glance, there was nothing wrong with the site. I said, you have some great graphics. Why wouldn't anyone be interested? But it was as we began to learn more about the user, we actually spoke to the users, that we learned that they actually want to know who the people are behind this organization first, rather than directly taking a look at the work. And that immediately enabled us to, go ahead and just explore what the portfolio website could be. And here was the final result, where basically we focused more on the people. Let's give this a second to move on. So as you can notice, we first introduce the purpose of the company, and then we go ahead and walk people through the actual people behind the organization. And only then do we actually move into the work and actually describe the kind of work we like to do. And it is this kind of going ahead and redesigning of concepts which I focused upon. It was, again, still no code. And then as I moved forward, okay, I got an opportunity to actually get recognized by Adobe. They said, hey, we've seen your talent. We really like what you're doing. Why don't you come down and teach? And that's where my career in teaching also began. I began to teach quite often. In fact, I was teaching first for Adobe. I also got a chance to simultaneously teach my first course at the Indian School of Design and Innovation and Indian School of Management and Entrepreneurship, where I still happen to teach today. And then I went all the way back to the University of Washington to continue studying. And I got an opportunity to teach a lot more students for 2 consecutive years, which was great. And basically, it was a great opportunity for me to continue discussing design and also conduct workshops on the side. And I love creating fire hazards, as my friends like to say, because what we would all do is we'd get together in rooms and we'd start to focus on actually coming together to learn how to create different types of designs for different business scenarios. And while this was a fire hazard, we didn't always keep it like this. We finally did end up making larger rooms where we could actually fit more people in without it being too dangerous. And that's when I actually learned about the problems which people face with, learning UX design, because getting a chance to speak to so many people made me realize that a lot of the people in school were facing similar problems which I had faced, which was basically they hear a lot of definitions and they're asking, what do these definitions mean? What are the softwares out there? How do I go learn those softwares? Okay. Is there a specific type of project I should do? There was no information available for them in one place because it was always just dribble shots. People would go onto like different websites and only see their end design. There was no one really discussing what's the career pathway you should be taking. And that actually made me start on working on UX library, which was basically a way for me to share my knowledge with other people. And actually today it's being used in over 130 countries. And I really love seeing the messages that come back because people tend to say, hey, Zoshua, this is really great. And it's not always messages of positiveness. Sometimes people are going to be like, hey, I wish you had an article about this. But it was this place like at UX library where I began to realize that the state of UX education is not fantastic, in every country. In some countries, it's great. Some countries are just starting to get started per se. And that began to get my mind thinking about what needs to be done. But I still do not have a proper answer per se, apart from this, website which I'd made. And that made me instead go ahead and focus upon how I could just instead help startups at that time. And primarily what I did out there was I began to focus on, again, seeing how I could enhance the experiences. So rather than looking at the code, I focused on how I could enhance experiences. One of the startups I worked with was called Crypto Briefing. And they came to me with a challenge basically saying, Zoshua, we have this website which is focusing on cryptocurrency news. How can we add value to our website per se? Okay. And again, what we began to focus upon was just looking for opportunities to make the user want to come in because there are so many news websites out there. And what we realized was that people were really interested always in seeing the value of a news item before they actually open it. And they want to know the context. And it was basically going ahead and talking to the users that actually made us realize they want to know which cryptocurrencies are, popular apart from Bitcoin and getting to know the coin they should be, reading about before they actually open an article. And it was these simple changes that actually began to help them. And we noticed that this is really helpful and began to push it out slowly. And in fact, it's still in the process of being pushed out. And it's experiences like this which I began to focus my energies on, which is how can we begin to make an experience more valuable for a user? Or for example, how could we make a reading experience also better by going ahead and ensuring when an article is being read, it's easy to read without too much difficulty. Like you don't have to have a large font. It's nice and easy for you to read and learning the best practices and implementing them and seeing immediate results. And after going in and helping Crypto Briefing and also like still thinking about how to change the state of UX education, I finally got an opportunity to come to Pathrise where I am today, where I began to focus on helping people, take that final step in their career towards actually getting jobs in the field of design because I wanted to go ahead and realize where exactly people struggle. And I realized that people are able to grasp the simple concepts of UX, but they're not really able to understand how to use UX in an actual job and how to pitch themselves as well. And I joined Pathrise, and as a mentor out there, I got a chance to help so many fellows. But simultaneously, I also began to design solutions to help our fellows. For example, some of the solutions I worked upon were creating a Pathrise job tracker because Excel spreadsheets, which were being used by fellows, took so much time to use. So how can we speed up that process with a two-click, extension per se? So it was like small projects like this, which actually brought a lot more value to people in my organization. And primarily, we wanted to then explore how could we bring, impact to a consumer without them having to do something. And that's when I went behind the scenes and I realized that we had a mentor dashboard which we used, but it was really terrible. Okay, as you can see out here, if I had to be a mentor, if I just saw a list like this and I saw a lot of names, there's no action which I could potentially take from here. And primarily, it doesn't even tell me much of a story. So what could we do to change it? And after actually talking to mentors, what we realized was that they actually wanted to see some key information about particular, fellows in the program. For example, let's just take a look at my own profile out here. You can notice I can just see the names of fellows who I have under me. How could we change that? It was by going ahead and providing insights and information people wanted to see. For example, we may want to go ahead and see quick statistics which can enable us to understand how we are performing. Okay, understand what our benchmark has to be, understanding, where we need to be focusing our efforts. Potentially, maybe there's a fellow who needs attention. Okay, for example, maybe we see a fellow out here who needs attention. We may want to know if they've not done a particular task. It's tasks like this, basically, which I began to focus my energies upon is how can we improve experiences and less on focusing on what code needs to be done because there's a dedicated software engineer for that. So that's lesson number one of what I had to share with you all, which is basically that, when you come into the field of UX, you never want to think about, thinking about, oh, I need to learn how to code or I need to know how to use Photoshop. You want to go ahead with the mindset of saying, we want to focus upon improving experiences. Okay. And that's the second thing which I'm now going to go into, is trying to describe to you all what the goal of UX is. So before I start discussing what UI UX is, I want to clear the idea primarily of what design is itself. Okay. So how many of you all have seen this quote by Steve Jobs? Anyone? Feel free to raise your hand if you've seen this quote by Steve Jobs. It says, design is not just what it looks like and feels like, it is how it works. Has anyone ever seen this quote? Feel free to raise your hand or even type something about it in the chat. Okay. So I'm going ahead and seeing some of you all seem to be going ahead and putting messages in the chat. Okay, so survey says it's in his book. Okay. Has anyone else, read about it? Let's go ahead and see the participants. Okay, so I see 16 people raising their hand. So quite a few of you are aware of this, right? So what does this mean per se? Like, design is not just what it looks like and feels like, it is how it works. Primarily, it tries to focus upon making people realize that design is less about just the aesthetics of something, okay? Because tomorrow you can make the most prettiest object in the world, okay? And it may feel also amazing in the hand. But if there's no particular use to the object, it's useless, right? It's not a product which you'd want to ever keep. Or potentially, let us say tomorrow you make a beautiful, stunning looking phone. But when you actually start to use it and you begin to realize that, it's really frustrating to use. Maybe it has a very difficult interface, okay? Like you're trying to do something and every time you have to do a particular task, it maybe takes you 10 minutes to do it and you find it really exhausting, because on the other phones out there in the market, it's a lot faster, okay? So it's primarily trying to go ahead and make you realize that design is less about visual aesthetics of things and more about the functionality and the usability and the value a product brings into one's life, okay? And I think this really tends to hold really true in the field of UI UX, which primarily stands for user interface and user experience design, okay? Because it's not about designing a fancy movie poster, okay? You're really focusing on creating an experience most of the time. So you don't really need to know how to go ahead and use Photoshop to create maybe a face disintegrating into particles, or going and learning how to make this gold emboss or make this rain effect. It's less of that, because if you open up a mobile app or a website today, it's just full of like text blocks and rectangles and images, okay? And sometimes a few circles. So that's primarily the first thing which you need to understand, is when you're focusing on understanding what UI UX is the goal is to primarily create experiences. So let's go ahead and take a look at a particular scenario, okay? Imagine tomorrow you were to create a product. When someone uses that product, I'm sure you all would agree that using that product would be an experience, right? It could be a good experience, or it could be a bad experience, or it could be a mediocre experience. But let's go ahead and now take a look at it from the perspective of cars, because I think that's a ground which all of us have familiarity with, okay? I know all of us like potentially are aware of what cars are. So let's take a look at cars as a product category, okay? And the market has three, standard types of cars which you have. You have a BMW 3 Series, you have a Volkswagen Polo, and you have a Mercedes AMG sports car. Let's try and understand these three products which we see in front of ourselves. We see the Volkswagen Polo. It's a city car, okay? And what's special about the Volkswagen Polo? It needs to be really small and have good fuel economy, right? Good mileage. And it should carry approximately 4 people. And that's primarily what makes it special, right? The fact that it has good economy and that it needs to be small, because it's a city car. The target audience for the Polo is primarily a city goer on a small budget who really needs to go ahead and find, small parking spots, because most of the time in a city like, let's say like Mumbai, you're not going to find parking very easily. Let's take a look at another car, which is a BMW 5 Series, okay? It's a luxurious car. It's meant for someone who's starting to do really well in life or is doing well in life. It needs to be nice and big and luxurious, right? Because they're doing well in life. They want to pamper themselves, okay? So it's going to be very big. It's going to have lots of features. And suddenly fuel economy is not that important anymore as compared to, the city car. And again, it should carry 4 people. let's take a look at the last car, the Mercedes AMG sports cars which are out there. Okay, let's take a C63 or a E63. It's a sports car, right? And suddenly the target audience wants the car to be very, very, very fast. Okay, it has to be a very fast car, lots of features. Fuel economy is definitely not important if you're going to be paying a crore or two for a car. Okay, and it should carry two people. What you would have just seen is that these are three different products per se. Okay, and what made them different and valuable and successful products in the market was that they had a specific target audience. Okay, which actually went ahead and overall gave structure to the existing product which you see today out there on the road. And that's a key thing to understand about UX as well, is that there's always going to be different requirements coming out from different users, which in the end will lead to different experiences. So this is a key thing for you all to understand, which is that if you have a different user, they'll definitely have different requirements, and therefore you'll have different experiences coming out of it. Okay. And to go ahead and test your knowledge, okay, about just seeing what I just shared with you, I want you to just think about a situation of how does the same thing apply for digital technologies, okay? Let us take Facebook versus Snapchat. I want you to think about how is Facebook different from Snapchat and how is Snapchat different from Facebook. Take 1 minute to think about it. Think about who is their target audience, what are the requirements, and how are they completely different applications from each other, and type out your thoughts in the chat. Okay, feel free to type your thoughts out in the chat about how you feel Facebook is different from Snapchat, because they're both in the social media category, but they're extremely different experiences. So let's discuss it a bit more. Go ahead and type your thoughts in the chat. Okay, I'm seeing some thoughts coming in. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and say, like, take 10 more seconds, and then we'll actually get started with discussing your thoughts. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so a lot of thoughts which were shared in the chat. Some of them were extremely interesting. I'm going to just start to discuss a few of them. I know there are like over like 40 plus thoughts shared already. I'm going to discuss a few of them with you, which actually were like really stood out to me. So the first one was that someone mentioned the target audience is different, right? The target user per se, the target customer is different, right? Whereas for Facebook, your target customer today is like a larger audience, right? There's a lot of adults, okay? And when it started off, it was only focusing on college students, but today it focuses on serving a lot of people from a lot of different countries, okay? And coming from different age groups. It's no more just, for a college student. In fact, it's being used by a larger adult population today, okay? And in fact, the teens are not always on Facebook anymore. They're instead on this app called Snapchat, okay? And primarily that's where the story begins to be different for both these applications, is that you see Facebook, okay, is focusing for all people. Snapchat is for teenagers, okay, as Irisha shared, as well as Dave shared, okay. And as we begin to go ahead and start to understand what the experience is, I think Pulkit actually went ahead and really defined what makes the experiences different, which is Facebook actually is all about news and information, which Pulkit mentioned, where Facebook as an experience, today, if you take a look at it, it's a social media app out there, right? And it's focusing on all audiences per se, okay, like large audience per se. and they're focusing on reading content. Okay, basically, when you open up the Facebook app, your home page is what? It's a stream of information, okay, for you to go ahead and absorb from people around you, as well as from pages, as well as groups you're subscribed to. It's a more content reading experience, okay, and less of a sharing experience almost all the time. But if you take a look at teenagers, what teenagers really wanted was a way to go ahead and not have something permanently stay out there on the internet as compared to what Facebook has. Because when you make a post on Facebook, things always remained out there on the Facebook app itself, right? When it came onto Snapchat, the value proposition was completely different and something which attracted the target audience, which was the teenagers, which was they got an opportunity to share content in the moment, which could actually disappear after 24 hours. So they didn't have to have that stress per se of saying, oh my God, I've shared this. I'm now like, I feel a bit, odd per se. I'm not sure if it should be out there. It was a way for them to quickly take a shot, take a snap, and immediately, move on with life and continuously share their life with others and become a lot more close. So whereas Facebook was focusing on people consuming content, Snapchat was more focused on people sharing content with people who they are very close to. And that's why when you open up the Snapchat home screen, okay, it's very different from what you see on Facebook's home screen, because Snapchat is focusing on what their target audience wanted, which is what the young adults wanted, an opportunity to share moments without having to be too stressed out on whether it will remain permanent. So today, when you open up the Snapchat app, it's actually just a camera view. We can go ahead and view your scenario, basically what's in front of you and your own face, and take a photo and immediately send it out. And what you would have just seen is that Facebook, Snapchat, both social media applications, both very successful at what they do. Okay, but basically what differentiated them at the end of the day was what the user wanted. And more importantly, you would notice that even though they're social media applications, the experiences you have with both these apps are very, very different. Snapchat focuses on you sharing intimate moments, whereas Facebook, intimate moments just for a short time period, whereas Facebook focuses on sharing information which will remain out there permanently. Okay, and I saw that many of you all actually went ahead and spoke about that. There are lots of messages actually address that, so that's really good to see. Okay, so now you're starting to understand, I would say, or hopefully you're starting to understand the differences between just normal ideas of design which people have about just thinking about visual aesthetics, and actually beginning to understand what the whole concept of an experience is per se. Okay, Facebook and Snapchat, both great apps, okay, but they had different experiences. So while they both look potentially nice, I know there may be split opinion where some of you may think that Facebook doesn't look that great, but overall, they're not nasty looking apps, right? The design looks, I would say, at least 4 out of 5 per se for both the applications. So what you would have seen out here is design is not just about what it looks like and feels like. It is how it works, okay? It's an experience which you're crafting together, because of which why people will return to you, okay? So when you start to think about UX, don't just narrow it down to aesthetics, okay? Yes, aesthetics will help in building credibility, okay? They build, trust, but there's also a joy of use that has to come in. People enjoy using the Snapchat app because of the overall experience of being able to share moments so easily, okay? People enjoy going to Snapchat and not other copycat clones because they're able to have an experience which is really easy for them to use, right? It's easy for you to know exactly what you're supposed to do. It's super intuitive, okay? You know that, okay, you're supposed to click on that circle to take a photo, okay? Or when you go on Facebook, you know exactly you need to click on that like button to support something. It's that form of usability, okay, and the joy of use, which contributes as well to the overall experience of a product. So don't think of design, at least especially in the field of user experience design or product design per se, as just about making the prettiest interface out there. I can tell you from experience, making the prettiest interface will not always deliver results, okay? It's actually going ahead and understanding what does the user really need. So if we need to go ahead and craft experiences, and I'm telling you, it's not about just aesthetics, okay? You may have a question, which is that, Zoshua, if it's not all about aesthetics, okay, then does that mean I don't have to get started on a computer before this? And the answer is actually yes. You're not going to be getting started with using a computer usually when you actually go ahead and start off with designing products, okay? The actual UX process is something which is completely different. As you will see in front of you, okay, there are basically 4 circles, okay, which actually highlight the different stages of something known as the overall UX process per se. Now, each organization has their own interpretation of this. You'll also go online and you'll see there are some, variations of this. Some of you all who may be comfortable or like aware of, the whole concept of design thinking may already be aware of the similar process, okay? And the overall idea primarily of going and following UX processes to not get started directly with designing a solution on your computer, but to instead go ahead and start off by understanding your business as well as your user at the start. Okay. So what you'll notice right here is there's a first stage known as research, okay, which is basically understanding where exactly does your business stand per se, okay? If you want to potentially, let's say, introduce a new app out there tomorrow, you want to know, is there anyone already trying to solve this problem and how are they solving it, okay? How do their customers feel about that existing solution? Or if there's no existing solution out there, how do people who experiencing this issue feel at the moment? How are they feeling? What's really frustrating them? What is their day-to-day life like? How is a potential product which we may introduce fit into their life? Okay, that's the first thing you'll start to do in this stage known as research. And when you do this, you'll actually get a lot of data which you'll be collecting. And that's why you will never be able to immediately move forward with going onto a computer still. What you'll start to do with all the data you've collected, which may be in like multiple Excel spreadsheets and documents per se, is you'll start to go ahead and try and find ways to synthesize them into something known as insights. Okay. And there are multiple ways to show insights. As you'll see out here, there's something called task models, user stories, and personas. So what is a task model or user story or persona? These are basically artifacts which represent the research which you've got. Because when you're actually moving onto your computer or even like designing on paper per se, no one will ever have the time to look at multiple Excel spreadsheets. They'll have time to maybe, go ahead and refer to one sheet of paper or basically one paragraph, which can immediately summarize the insights. So that's primarily what happens at the start of any UX project is you first go ahead, understand your user, and then go ahead and build out some form of, artifact which synthesizes those insights. And once you're able to do that, only then do you actually move into the stage known as conceptualization, where you start to think about the visual aesthetics per se to some extent. And primarily out here, we start to think about what are some different ways to solve the problem. Do we need a mobile app potentially? Do we need a desktop app? Do we need a website app? What's the approach we want to take? You will start off by drawing out on paper, okay? And as you start to draw it on paper, you'll come up with something known as low fidelity wireframes, which kind of look like what you can see out here, potentially. Just sharing my like page right here. Hopefully y'all can see this as well as possible. But you'll start to draw out ideas which you have maybe on paper per se. And you'll start to get validation by going back and talking to the users you first spoke to see if you're going in the right direction. And it's only once you go ahead and do your research, you make sketches, you get some validation for the ideas and directions you're moving forward with, and you work upon that initial feedback that you actually shift into using a computer and using the softwares which may exist to go ahead and actually make something known as a prototype. You'll continue to refine it. And then at the end, you'll actually go ahead and strip out the entire experience, or known as going and coding it out, and giving it to an engineer to potentially use. So what you would have just noticed is that if you want to craft a good experience, it's never going to start with a computer. It's actually going to get started with first understanding, the user, understanding where your business lies with context to the entire market, synthesizing those insights, using those insights to go ahead and make sketches, iterating on those sketches using feedback and validation, and then moving on to a computer and actually, going and refining the idea and giving it to an engineer. So I hope this makes you all understand a bit about, why exactly we want to go ahead and understand the goal of UX, which is to craft good experiences, and makes you understand the overall process which we use to craft these experiences itself. So I see there are a few like messages that have come in the chat. So I'm just going to go ahead and see what they are. So someone who's gone ahead and mentioned, Rishi's mentioned that empathy is the first step. And I also see that someone else has also mentioned, that UI is always going to be sometimes terrible for a beginner per se to get started with. And I think both of these are potentially really good, answers per se in the chat, which is empathy is known as a feeling which, where you actually can feel for your user. You can feel the pain they're feeling. And the way to build up that feeling per se is by going in and actually talking to them. Because if you don't know how your user will use the product, it can actually lead to problems. And we're going to discuss it very soon And I also see that someone else mentioned you can always have terrible UI if you directly get started with this, what I'm trying to, at least that's what I understand from the message. So that's actually true. And we'll be seeing this in a mini case study very soon. And I also see Rishi Raj has mentioned a question. It just says, how to create trust and harmony through UI and UX. Rishi, that's a great question. So the way you start to create trust and harmony through UX per se is by, I think, first of all, understanding what your user really wants. Okay, so you actually do your research. You'll understand particularly what's going to make them say yes to trying out your product and valuing the time they're giving you. Okay, because I think time is the thing which users tend to really put as one of their top priorities, because not a lot of people have time. So in this day and age, in the field of mobile apps and the instant validation which you get, not validation, instant gratification you get from these applications you use, the patience which people have tends to be really low. So to build trust, it's really important to have a system which actually does not take too much time to understand and use. And when it comes to harmony, there are multiple ways to create harmony, like having consistency, in patterns. These are actually some detailed concepts which I could discuss, towards the end. And I'll also go ahead and discuss how to create trust in a bit more detail at the end of the session. But to quickly answer you and give you a small hint about how people create trust, usually it's through validation, like social validation, people saying, hey, we actually like this product. Maybe when you go into a website, it'll say like, we've been trusted by so-and-so brands, or you'll maybe see case studies of how people use it. Sometimes you'll go ahead and see a video about how to use the product. Maybe you'll sometimes go ahead and also see, there's a small free trial you get so that you can actually experience the product first, and then you sign up only once you trust it and you pay for the subscription. So there are different ways of how you can actually start to build out trust. Sharath has a question out here, which is, can we build interest or trust upon a product with UI or an attractive UI along with understanding customer empathy or customer experience needs? So that's a pretty long question. Let me break it down into two parts. So I think, yes, you can build trust definitely with good product UI. I think having an app which follows the best principles out there, and best patterns as well, will definitely increase trust because of the fact that people immediately know how to interact with it. When it comes to attractive UI, I think you don't want to focus on making a UI which is potentially very pretty. It's fine to have a pretty UI, but what matters more is, do you have usable UI? Okay, like, is your interface usable? So does that mean like when someone comes onto your interface, do they know what they have to tap on? Are they able to go through the process pretty quickly? Are they not making mistakes? I think that's a better aim or objective of having a great experience by using best patterns and practices for creating good interfaces per se. I also see there are two questions which come in the QA. So let me just see that. So one of the questions is from Dev. He says, how does a product designer decide between data to use, like qualitative or quantitative, analytics for optimizing the product? Great question again, Dev. So depends on the situation, what you're trying to answer. And actually what I'm going to go ahead and do is we're going to be discussing a case study very soon. Okay, so I think a case study, in fact, Dev, will start to answer, when do we use analytics and when do we discuss, when do we use user research, where we're actually using customer insights by interviewing them or doing surveys. So let's go ahead and move to the third section of today, which is focusing on the business value of UX design. And I think there's no better way to discuss the business value of UX design than actually going ahead and giving you a mini case study from my workplace itself called Pathrise. So one of our designers originally at Pathrise, her name was Imani Buiford. And when she joined us, primarily, she focused on seeing how she can use design to help a small startup, make a better experience. And the startup at that time was called Pathrise. It's still today called Pathrise. And what they're primarily focusing on at that moment was going ahead and giving mentorship to people who are looking for a job in tech. Okay. And many a times those people would come onto these mentoring video sessions, one-on-one sessions, and the mentor would actually be helping out the fellow. And sometimes they'd also have workshops where they'd be discussing ideas in groups and also helping out fellows per se. But one thing the mentors began to feel is that, the fellows keep coming to us with a lot of questions, okay? And if they come to us with a lot of questions, it kind of denies us the time which we could instead use to make potentially better content, okay, for our fellows in the program. And potentially we could even use that time for other, purposes for the company per se. And potentially we wouldn't have to have fellows waiting for so long to get their questions answered. And as soon as he did that, the company said, you know what? Why don't we just quickly go ahead and make a knowledge base? Okay. It was basically a very primitive experience which we drew out on paper. The CEO at that time was in the organization just before Imani came, and he drew out a paper prototype. He said, okay, this is going to be a design. And he started to launch it out and they coded it out. And they said, you know what, this should be solving a problem. But it wasn't actually solving the problem because this continued to exist even after Imani joined. So to better understand the scenario of why it is not working, what they immediately decided to do was they said, why don't we just take a look at how people are using our product at the moment? Okay. And this is when Kevin and Imani decided to work together in actually just seeing how the current experience is being used by users by using a tool known as Full Story. Full Story is basically a web analytics tool where you can basically see how any user on your platform is using the platform. And as we could see out here with the existing knowledge base, which Kevin had originally drawn out, not a lot of people were able to find information easily. So they had thrown a lot of information onto a website. Like you can see the like simple blog articles, and there's a navigation bar on the left-hand side. But half the content was not easy to find, and there was no way to quickly search for information if someone wanted to search for it. And people began to feel very frustrated. Okay, and they got a chance to see this from web analytics because that didn't have to have them maybe call someone in. They got to see it within the context, and that way they didn't even have to set up a user research session. And they began to see this for quite a few users. Okay, so they began to actually see a lot of users having the same issue. They were to keep clicking on the sidebar. They couldn't find the information they want, and they just quit. And they end up again emailing the mentor. The mentor has to support them. And primarily, the issues could be narrowed down to basically saying that there's no way to search. There's no consistency in the way information has been organized. It's extremely time consuming. And basically, I don't even know what this is and how to find what I want. And this is immediately what made them realize that, you know what, we need to actually now start to reorganize our information and redesign this particular platform. And they then began to actually talk to the users because they said, now we need to have a user or two come up to us and tell us what we're supposed to do. And they actually did an activity known as card sorting, where they took all the information they had on the platform and they actually said, why don't you come to us and just show us how you'd organize the information if you were to see it. And what they began to see was a pattern where people actually began to take the articles and they said, you know what, there are lots of articles in the navigation bar and they're not actually organized how we would perceive them per se. We actually see articles from the perspective of which stage of the job hunting search we are in. Are we just starting to like make a resume, or are we starting to apply for jobs, or are we actually interviewing or negotiating? And that was the first great insight they got, was they actually had to organize the content, based on the stages in the job search, not actually by going in and saying like category one is, let's say, going to be talking about so and so coding skills, and next category is focusing on another set of coding skills and so on. It was actually a completely different experience which people expected. After doing that, she began to take a look also at what are some of the other people who present information, what are they doing? And by going ahead and reviewing, what the consumer wanted, basically what the user wanted, and seeing what are some best practices to practice content, she was able to go ahead and put together an experience which actually led to really good results. So what was that experience? Let's give this website a second or two to load. Perfect. So this was a redesign experience where today a user no more had to like go and pay attention to that entire sidebar. Now they could quickly pay attention, just click on the search bar, type in the search query, and they could see the results. And if they were not sure what they wanted to specifically search for, they could actually see 5 or 6 categories presented, 5 categories presented to them. And the 5 categories were basically the different job stages. And by doing this, they began to immediately notice a lot more people began to use the platform. And to further enhance the experience, they also added opportunities for people to filter down on content rather than having to, browse through all the content each time because there were so many articles and videos on the blog. And by introducing filters and a search bar and these different categories and making the articles easy to read and consume right at the start and the ability to bookmark it, it actually led to a lot of business impact because now when the user came onto the platform, they actually returned. So there was actually an increase in retention. The 75% retention was there. In fact, after a week as well, 56% of the people who actually came the first time actually returned to again use the learning management system which was created, or knowledge base per se. And at the end, 83% of people went ahead and at least navigated to one resource. What you just saw was the business value of UX design. Okay, because if they did not go ahead and take a look at the user, they would just continuously face that problem of a user coming in and asking questions because they're frustrated with that knowledge base they had put out. And this also goes ahead and highlights why UX design is important, because as you saw at the start, Kevin had actually gone ahead and understood the problem. But what he did was he only had a primitive idea of it. He knew that the people kept coming to the mentors and kept annoying them per se, like, not giving them enough time to help other people. So he went and made that on paper and got a coder to make it out. So the coder had made this, but it was not really useful. So they just wasted a lot of engineering time and effort as well for an experience which not a lot of people found useful. So what you would have just seen is if they had actually followed the UX design process right from the start, they could have also saved themselves a lot of engineering time and effort. And that's one really important thing you want to understand about UX design, is that when you're going ahead and working on any product, you don't want to invest time directly into coding. In fact, a majority of your time as a designer, okay, as a UX designer, product designer per se, is going to actually be spent in just doing research, prototyping, testing, doing the cycle, in fact, multiple times if required. And only once you're really sure of your idea, okay, you got enough validation, only then will you actually give it to an engineer to start to ship out. Okay, so that's one really important thing for you all to understand today, is that the purpose of UX design is to go ahead and create valuable experiences which people actually desire, and not just an experience which you draw out on paper per se. So I saw a few questions still pop up in the Q&A. So let me just see them. Okay, it's the same questions from last time. I think they'll disappear at the end. Also, I wanted to know, Dave, was I able to better answer your question about, when do we use, qualitative versus quantitative analytics? Dave, was I able to answer your question? Okay, awesome. So what I'm going to go ahead and now do is I'm going to go ahead and take a small two-minute break. Okay. In the 2-minute break, feel free to go ahead and grab yourself a drink or have some water. Feel free to go to the bathroom. And also, if you have any questions as well, feel free to post them in the chat before we move into the last segment of today's session. So feel free, go grab yourself a bottle of water if you need, go to the bathroom if you need to, or feel free to ask a few questions. And then we'll return after 2 minutes to focus on the last segment of today's session. So Simran asked, what is the last segment about? And Monish asks, how long is the session going to be? So I think the session is going to take approximately another, I think maybe 15 minutes after this. And the last segment is primarily going to focus on how do you start to learn UX, okay? Because that's a key challenge which I faced in my career. And we'll do that primarily by, I'll give you a quick guide. And then also go ahead and talk about my journey. You can ask me questions. We can discuss the challenges I faced, the mistakes I made, because I think knowing the mistakes I made in my career are more important than knowing about my successes. So you can feel free to ask me questions about that. So that's primarily what the last segment will be about. And I would say we'd spend approximately, another 10 to maybe 20 minutes, or even if you'll want longer, I'm more than happy to sit around and help. So during the 2-minute break, there's also another question which came in, which is, which browser extensions do you use the most? That's a good question, Preet. Let's go ahead and I'll show it to you. So the 2 browser extensions which I tend to use the most, actually the 3 per se. I think the ad blocker is one which we all use, but outside of the ad blocker, I happen to use this, extension called Color Pick Eyedropper. So many times I want to quickly pick up a color, just see the hex code for it, a color code. So I can just click on it and then I basically drag it around. Let's come here. Go ahead and click on it. I can drag it around, and let's say I want to get this yellow color code. I can easily pick it up. So I happen to use this pretty often. And then in addition to this, I actually pay for this extension right here, which you see. It's called Go Full Page. It's basically easy to use website screenshot plugin per se. So if I click on it, it basically captures my entire screen. So those are 2 plugins which I tend to use pretty often. Okay, we'll wait for another minute, and then after that, we'll move into the last segment for today's session. So I see one more question. Is it really necessary to know coding to be a UX designer? I don't really think so. In fact, you'll always read up online as well that you don't really need to know how to code to be a UX designer. It's good to know, okay, but you don't have to know it. Okay, like there are lots of UX designers who don't code at all. A UX designer who does code, there's a career for that. It's called UX engineering, okay, or sometimes they call them a design technologist or a UI engineer. They primarily just focus on taking the end design which the UX designer makes and actually coding it out. Okay, so you can also call them like front end web developers, like we also like to call them that. So that's primarily what UI engineer or UX engineer does, is they actually start to code out that final design which is ready. There's another question which came in, which is from Monish. He said, could you please suggest few courses from where to learn as a beginner? So Monish, I'm actually going to discuss that very soon. So I'll get to that. And primarily, I'm going to, in fact, inform you that there's no one place where you want to just go and learn design. There are actually multiple ways to learn it. And I think that's really important and something I learned in my own career. Pulkit asked the question, how can we learn UI UX if we can't buy a particular course? Pulkit, there are a lot of good, ways to learn UI UX apart from watching a video course. And there are a lot of good free video courses. I'll discuss them with you and show it to you as well. I'll also ask another question about which prototyping software I use. I happen to use a prototyping software called Figma. And it's one of the leading tools in the industry. There's also Adobe XD and Sketch. I happen to not use Sketch or Adobe XD because they don't have as many features as Figma has. And Figma is now the industry like set standard. Like everybody's actually migrated to it. Microsoft, in fact, did a huge migration 2.5 years ago, I think, where they realized that they want to use Figma to collaborate together. Because like Figma is basically a design tool, which is like Google Docs. So basically everyone can collaborate together and work together to design rather than just one individual making a file and then sending it over email for them to again open it up on their computer. Everyone can edit one single source of truth. So that's why I tend to use Figma very often. I think Sketch and Adobe XD also have these collaboration features, but now they lack some other new features which Figma has introduced. There are also some other questions that have come in. I'll be discussing them very soon, okay, as we get to the last segment, basically the last section. So I'm going to go ahead and close the chat and move to the final section of today's session. So I've gone ahead and now like started to make you understand, the value of UX design. And hopefully you all have been able to understand that when you go ahead and create an experience, okay, you're basically going to contribute to a few things in a business. You're going to help them improve the productivity of their users, okay? You're going to potentially reduce support and maintenance costs. Today's case study was a great example of that we actually reduced the support and maintenance costs of Pathrise because now they do not have to reply to a fellow each time. They could actually go to the website and actually knew how to use it. There's improved user satisfaction. The fellows in the program were no more dissatisfied with the platform which we had created for the knowledge base. And there's improved brand image as well, okay? Because now people can say, you know what, Pathrise is able to give me support, not just, when I'm in a session, but also offline as well through their website. Now, that's really important for you to understand is these are the 4 ways UX can actually help an organization. And don't just limit yourself to thinking that UX is only there, on desktop and web. It's even there in the automobiles you use, right? If you enter a car, the digital infotainment system you use, that's also an experience, okay? You go ahead and even go home, go to your TV, there's a TV remote next to it. That's an experience of using that remote. Some remotes are really terrible to use. Like I still don't know how half the buttons on my remote even today. That's a terrible experience potentially. Or you go to your microwave in your home, okay? I have a really complicated microwave. Only my mom knows how to use it. I'm sure most of you will also experience the same thing where when you start to use that microwave, you might feel frustrated. That's also sometimes, a potentially bad experience. So don't just think of UX, primarily limited to digital spaces. It can even be applied to marketing. What's the experience of consuming your first, advertisement? Potentially, when you watch a YouTube ad or when you go and use Instagram advertisements, there are some great advertisements which come on websites as well. Now we could interact with them. So UX can be applied to multiple, domains. Don't just think of it as desktop and web and automobiles and marketing. But I still want to talk about what really has made this field super popular before I go into why you need to learn it and how to learn it. So if you take a look at the market, okay, in today's day and age, you'll always see a mobile phone in everyone's pocket. And the field of UX design owes a lot of credit to the field of, mobile devices, because until 2007, this industry did exist, but it was much smaller. There were a lot fewer designers. Okay, they were primarily called web designers at that time. Front end web developers were like just software engineers who were making websites. Okay, and they were called web designers. Sometimes a graphic designer would go and design a website. You had those flash macro media sites. Okay, and then suddenly in 2007, a major event happened. Does anyone know what happened in the year 2007? What changed for the entire like field of technology? The iPhone came in. As Sarvesh and Abhigya have said, a lot of people are saying it. Okay, the iPhone came in. Steve Jobs came out of the dais, okay, of the wherever they were presenting the iPhone, and he said, "Today we're going to be releasing I think they said a revolutionary browser, a revolutionary iPod, a revolutionary phone," and actually turned out to be the iPhone. And that was a start, okay, which contributed the entire field of UX design. Because very soon, I think starting mid 2008 or 2009, if I'm not wrong, okay, the Apple App Store started. Everyone needed an app potentially. Everyone thought they needed an app at least. And a lot more demand came out there for an app for each business per se. Okay. Android also began to come in. Android also said, we're going to have our own app store. And suddenly there was a sudden demand for designers to design apps and for them to design good apps so that they could stand out. Okay. And that gave birth to the field of UX design in terms of where it has come today. If you just take a look at this graph, okay, it's just always been an upward trend. I noticed it is a screenshot from 2014 to 2017, but you can just see this interest is always being going further. Okay, we're in 2021. UX is here to stay, and it's just going and improving day by day. Okay, the field is becoming a lot more knowledgeable, a lot more skilled as well, and I think that's what makes UX fantastic for anyone to learn per se. So that brings me to my last segment today, which is primarily like my second last segment, which is primarily focused upon how to learn UX. Okay, and I think this is a question which I said at the start of today's session of I tried to tackle it. Okay, where I saw a lot of people came up to me and said, "Zosh, this is where I'm struggling in UX. I wish I knew this information. I don't know where to go." And it's the experience which I also felt. So I began to put all my knowledge into one place out here. I did a lot of interviews. This is not just the first version. It's actually the third or fourth version of UX library, which is out here, what you'll see. And this actually was a great experience for me to learn how people learn UX. And I'm going to share that with you today. So primarily the way I observe people actually start to learn about the field of design is you're not just going to learn through one place. Because to be honest, think about it like math or you're learning science, okay? You're not just going to learn math, after taking a 3-week course on math, okay? You'll start to learn math as you start to do more of it and as you begin to, progress through it. So the more work you do in math, the more math problems you solve, the better you become, right? And you don't just learn math from one teacher. You usually learn math from multiple teachers, sometimes your friends, sometimes from the textbook, okay? Sometimes by learning or solving new problems, that's how you learn, right? So that's the most important thing which I've observed about UX design is that when people start to listen to lots of different sources of information, they actually start to learn UX better because they're then just not relying upon a teacher, but they're relying on an entire ecosystem to feed them with information. And that's why when I went ahead and made UX library the first time, I did not know that. I just gave articles for people to read. But once I actually learned from people about what they really rely upon, it was not just articles. People actually wanted to first just get a quick overview of one particular aspect of UX first. And that's what I began to realize is that people first want an overview. So my recommendation to you is get started by first, getting an overview of a particular topic instead of UX, which you may want to learn. Maybe it's just the UX process as its whole. Start to read about it, okay? Maybe you want to use UX library. Maybe you want to use Google search, okay? Maybe you find another competitor out there. That's completely fine. Find a way to go ahead and start to make yourself a bit more aware, okay, about the particular domain you want to start learning more about. That's really important to give yourself an overview. then potentially based on the type of information and method in which you start to like to learn per se, start to look for resources in that domain. For example, if you like to read books, go and take a look for books. You can type UX process books. What are the books out there? Search it in Google, or come to UX Library, or go to even I think another like competitor to me is called productdesign.tips. Go out there, okay? Start to read about what books I should be reading. Okay, open one of the books. There are lots of websites where I can purchase the books from, and each of these books are potentially pretty relatively affordable. If you can't afford a book, look for some free versions of the book out there, or shift to articles. Okay, I in fact got a lot of my knowledge in the field of UX by reading a lot of articles. Okay, that's how I really enjoyed learning. My teachers were great, no discredit to them, but they couldn't cover everything with me in class. So articles were my next best friend. In fact, medium.com was the place which I was opening on a day-to-day basis, and a lot of design newsletters on my phone. And I would just go ahead and start to read the articles. Okay. And just reading the articles was not just enough for me. As I said, you got to get into the practice of solving problems. And that's what's really important for you. Start to look for projects which you can start to do per se. Okay. Whether it be, maybe you want to just design your own personal site. Maybe you notice there's a small business down the road. Okay. Like there's a small kirana wala. You decide to help him digitally. Maybe you can't make an app for him. Maybe you decide to help him with just designing out a small website for right at the start. And you find a friend who knows how to code, or you know how to code, and start to apply the principles of UX design, which you start to learn more about for that project. Okay. And as you start to do that, okay, you start to focus on helping small business potentially, you'll actually start to understand the process better, because just reading about it and listening to a lecturer will not really help you too much. You have to start doing it. Okay. Just like math or any science which you'll be learning. And you can do that by doing different activities as well. Like I've listed out a few activities which you could follow, or just learning about different processes as well, which you may want to do as, potentially. Now, the field of UX, as I explained to you, is like very vast and broad. In fact, as I showed you, it's a multi-step process. Okay. Based on which step of the process you really want to learn more about, start to explore it. There's no given, like one methodology to learn. You may want to start off by learning more about just becoming a better UI designer. So you focus first on learning UI design, and you start to do Google searches for that potentially to find information. Or you may decide that you're interested in, learning more about how to do research to understand a customer. Then you focus on doing UX research instead. So that's primarily what I want to share with you is there's no one right way to start to learn UX. Okay. You only right way potentially is to go ahead and look for multiple sources of information to inform you, and first get an overview of whatever you want to learn, and then use information sources which you like per se, whether it be a book, whether it be an article, whether it be potentially, like a software course. Find what you think will help you. I know many of you will ask me, Zoshua, where do we find free courses? On UX Library, I've actually listed out a lot of courses, which some of which are free, some of which are paid. Okay. I particularly have vetted through each of these courses, and I potentially like to say that they're all really good. I think 2 or 3 of the courses I mentioned out here are paid. They're not sponsored at all. You can see there are no affiliate links from me at all for any of them. This is a completely non-profit, initiative. Do check them out. Particularly, my favorite courses have been, out here, like from Hack Design. They actually have some great introductory design lessons which you can get started with. And if you're really interested, and you still want to say, Zosh, I want to make pretty, interfaces, check out the Learn UI Design courses out here, which I've listed out. They're all particularly very good. Okay. And most of them are for free. I think I've listed out a lot of free, courses, apart from the refactoring UI one, which is, YouTube with, like, they have a free YouTube channel, but they also have a paid book. So this is a great way to get started off. Okay. And if you're looking for just a step-by-step methodology to at least get your information systems up for like how to, absorb information, I've actually created a beginner's UX design kit, which actually has a list of things which you can start to do, all the way from quick things you should do to get quickly set up, to actually know which books you should get started with reading. According to me, it's only my personal opinion. It can be different for you. Okay. And I've also listed out 2 good UI courses, which I feel you should be taking, and UX courses as well, and some project ideas as well for you all. So if you're not sure about what project to do, I've listed out quite a few projects out here for you all to potentially try out. And if you ever need help per se, and you want to learn more about the field, don't just rely on Google search and, like a website like UX Library or just Medium. Reach out to other designers. Every designer I have met has taught me something new. So reach out to other designers on LinkedIn, Okay, it's a great way to get to know people. You all can also connect with me on LinkedIn as well. I've shared my LinkedIn out here. Okay, so you can feel free to get in touch with me on LinkedIn, but reach out to other designers. For example, when I joined Pathrise, Imani actually made me, like Imani was my coworker. Okay, she actually taught me a lot about, how to go ahead and polish up my UI design skills. Or when I joined Crypto Briefing, I learned a lot about doing something known as a competitive analysis, or basically understanding how to understand where a business stands as compared to the competitors and the different analytical tools to use for that. Okay, so don't just limit yourself to learning from books or learning from one course. Go ahead and learn from multiple sources of information. That's the best piece of advice I can actually give to you about learning UX per se. And definitely a course instructor and is going to be really helpful, but they can guide you, for like, let's say 3 hours per se in a week, maybe 4 hours. At the end of the day, you have to take the initiative outside, because at work as well, you're not going to spend like only 4 hours working. You're going to be spending like 8-hour days, right? So what are you going to be doing the time outside of the course also matters a bit. Okay, so you have to listen to other sources of information to be actively learning. And as I said, don't try and learn everything at once. Take it step by step. So I see there are lots of questions that have come in the chat. So I'm going to start to answer them. So the first question in the chat is primarily from, I think we see out here. They've asked a question: which sites do you use for inspiration and patterns and research? So great question, Dave. So I primarily relied upon two sites. So Mobin.design is a great website, to go ahead and check out basically mobile interfaces. I tend to use this very often, when I wanted to see some patterns. So let's give this a second to load. So I tend to use Mobin pretty often. So I can see each app and all the screens of the app. And if I shift from this apps tab to patterns, I can then filter out by patterns. Let us say I want to go ahead and take a look at patterns for onboarding guided tours. So I'll click on that. And I can see the different patterns which are used. So I tend to use this for inspiration pretty often. Like Mobin is one of my favorite places to go. Another really good website, or two websites which I really like to go to, it's not just to like focus on UI patterns per se, but just to go ahead and understand, like what are some ways people improve their experiences. So I take a look at, I think it's a great website called growth.design. It has a lot of great tips about, how you should be designing an application, what works well, what doesn't work well. So basically how our users, kept on a website. So I'll go to the case studies page. They have a lot of great free case studies for you to read. In fact, if you read these case studies today itself, you will actually understand how designers, sometimes hack your mind, and sometimes how they actually serve you well as well. Okay, so I think it's a great website to check out to see, like, patterns which are less, visual and more experiential per se. And the last one I think is called Great UX or Good UX. Really Good UX, my bad. It's called Really Good UX, I think. Here we go. So reallygoodux.io is another great site which I take a look at to see basically patterns for overall experiences. So they actually have it in categories. I think one of the categories is, onboarding, then they have modals, surveys, product tours, and so on. So I tend to use Really Good UX, Mobin, and growth.design. Other than that, I've also listed out, some other websites which I used to use. I don't use them as frequently as I used to, but I've listed them out on UX Library. So give this a second to load. So I've listed out all the different sites which I used to use out here. You can check it out. Depends on situation to situation. Sometimes I may revisit these, to learn more about patterns. Another question which came in, which was from Arushi. Sorry, she said, can UX designers do UI design too? After we get the best result, do we need to again design? So first of all, UX designers do tend to do UI design, especially if they are in junior roles. As you start to climb up the ladder and you move more into a senior UX design manager position, okay, you start to focus on the product in context of the other ecosystem of products potentially. Okay, that's what most people will be doing, as they begin to climb up the ladder in a large organization. They start to manage design teams and start to focus on the overall, experiential goals and giving feedback to multiple designers and not doing the UI design themselves. Okay, so that's primarily what happens is, as you're a junior UX designer, yes, you will be doing UI design. As you start to climb up the ladder, you'll start to move away from, using the UI design tools like Figma and allow your juniors to do it instead, and instead give them guidance and manage them. Another question which has come in, which is, what non-design things do you do as a hobby to sharpen your skills? I think primarily that's a good question. I think I also have a career, in basically going and teaching. So I think teaching is a good way for me to, gather feedback. So I think that's one way I actually sharpen my skills is potentially by teaching. I think teaching over the past 3 years or 4 years now, it's been 4 years. I just realized that yesterday has actually been really rewarding to me in terms of making me more confident as a speaker. It has also made me more aware of the different methodologies, people used to, explore the field of UX. And I've also been exposed to a lot more student projects. So, I've seen a lot more cool ideas per se, a lot more cool portfolios. So I think that kind of helps me sharpen my skills. I'm not specifically teaching to become a better designer, but it helps me like learn more about the field. And I specifically like to read a lot of news. I don't know if that news really helps me in my design per se, but that's my side hobby is reading a lot of news. I love to learn about design outside of UX. So there's this great Netflix show which I watched. I think it's called Abstract, and it has beautiful, I think documentaries on what each designer like. There's every week there's a new designer they're focusing upon. So I've not watched all episodes of Abstract, but that's actually helped me a bit per se. It's not related to UX directly, so I'll consider it as a way for me to learn more about the field. Um, Another one asked, how do I land my first job as a UX designer? So to land your first job, as a UX designer, you first need to ask yourself, where exactly are you? Okay. Because if you just, started learning UI UX design, you want to first understand the concepts and get started with doing at least 2 to 3 projects. Okay. You can do these 2 to 3 projects as concept projects or, for a small business or for an app idea you have or for a website idea. It doesn't matter per se too much, but you want to get started with doing out a few projects and building out a website portfolio, which you can use in your job applications. What does a portfolio usually look like? Here's an example. Okay. Jimmy Folds is was one of my fellows, at Pathrise. He had come to me, and basically what helped him in landing his job was his portfolio website. Okay. So he basically went ahead and crafted his portfolio website. And by going in and showcasing his projects, he was able to make a convincing argument to a recruiter and hiring manager to actually consider him for a role. Okay, so if you want to get started with, making your website first, I think that's really the best first move, in getting a first job in UX. Pulkit has a question, which is, as I'm a 19-year-old designer, just doing freelancing along with college, doing BCom's honors, what are some tips to make design as my career? I'm currently making posts for Instagram as my portfolio. I think Instagram is a great place to, show visuals, but people also care a lot about, learning about the process behind what you made. Okay, like I showed you the entire UX process today. So portfolio is not just based on like a pretty, image per se. It matters a lot more about how do you come to that pretty image. Let's take a look on just Jimmy's, portfolio right here. So one of his projects is called Open Stage. Okay, and if we pay attention to Open Stage, like at the start, he actually focuses on introducing the client he made the project for, understanding what are the goals of the project, and then what research did you do? Out here, he says he went ahead and actually investigated the competitors, and then actually began to go ahead, understand what experience he wanted to map out per se, started to go ahead and draw out some ideas on paper, got feedback, and he actually went ahead and just started to iterate, together as a team. They were just giving feedback to each other. He iterated upon the interface so we can see that process again. And then in the end, he shows us what validation he got from the customer, what changes he had to make a customer or user. It's almost the same thing per se for me at least. And then at the end, he shows the final design and how does it serve the customer and the goals per se. Okay. So people really want to see the story behind your work and not just, an Instagram, collection of beautiful images. It's great to have that. Okay. It's really nice to have it, but you also want to have a portfolio with the stories that will actually help you, in getting started with your career. So the portfolio is the first thing you'll want to make, if you want to get a job. And if you want to make design as a career, don't immediately like say, I'm going to stop doing whatever else you're doing. First, go ahead and focus on starting to do it slowly as a career. Get one job, do that job, do it as a side gig, see how you're doing in it. Okay. After that, go ahead and, start to take on a few more clients. And once you're earning a sizable income, which is going to be more than what you're currently earning from the other income potentially, then you can start to decide what decisions you want to make about, maybe making design a full-time career choice. don't immediately say I'm going to dump what I'm doing and shift into design. Start off by actually working for a few clients on the side. Small clients doesn't have to be the biggest client in the world. It'll actually give you a lot of experience and a lot of, I would say comfort per se, because you're not like, you don't have a lot of expectations on you from smaller clients because they understand where you're coming from. Okay. So there's another question which came in from Inzi, who said, what's the starting salary of a fresh UI UX designer? I think Inzi, this really depends from country to country and also from industry to industry and company to company. I can go ahead and like tell you like potentially what are the starting rates in the United States, because that's where I help people the most. Okay, in the United States, the starting salary of a fresh UI UX designer will range anything between 65 to 100,000, to even sometimes 120,000, depending on the company. 65 to 75 is for a really small company. 75 to 85 is for an established startup. 75 to 85 or even 95 will be for your mid-level enterprise companies, basically anyone focusing on like design agency work or going and doing consultancy work or maybe working on enterprise applications. Then above 95 to the 120k range, it's your big tech companies such as Facebook, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon. Okay, so that's what a starting salary is in USA. I can comment most confidently about that. I can't talk too much as of yet about India. Okay, so the chat, okay, I've seen a lot of questions also coming in the chat. So there are basically two places I should be looking at for questions. So Sarvesh mentioned UX library is looking like a pre-Imani Bathrise a bit. I completely agree. Okay, that's actually a great insight. So what I currently use for it is Gitbook. It was made over, I think, 2 or 3 days when we initially started. And there's actually been a transition which we're doing to Webflow, where we can actually customize the interface. Where we originally started off with was like with Gitbook, which controlled the entire interface, and we could only focus on the content itself. So primarily what we did realize was that sometimes content is slightly difficult to still discover, but we were able to go and make it slightly better to discover as compared to where it was before. We're just organizing it in a similar way to what you would see for Imani as well. As you could see, she organized it by topics. So that was basically a similar strategy which we had used. So that kind of helped us a bit, but the interface definitely has a lot of room for improvement. And that's where the transition will be. We're actually shifting platforms so you can get that independence. There's a question about, I got scared when you started. I was like, this is not what I thought about it, but I got some confidence. That's really sweet of you, Vikram. That's really nice of you. There's also another question. I'm just scrolling up a bit, which is, I wanted to ask that how can we think like a client? Because many times I cannot think like a client. That's a good question. I think I'm not thought myself like a client per se, but I would actually tell you my experiences of working with clients and where they come from. I'm guessing maybe you're coming from a place where clients are sometimes demanding you do something and you don't think it's the right decision. So usually a client has had a lot more, ownership of the business. They've been inside of that business for a lot longer, right? Usually a business owner will own the business maybe for 3 or 4 years. You're just coming in and making the website maybe for like, 1 or 2 weeks. So even though, like you're definitely giving them the right suggestion many a times, they don't want someone to completely dominate the, the show per se, because they've owned the business for so long. Suddenly someone else is coming in and telling me exactly what to do. It's a bit overwhelming for them. Okay. So I think the main thing is asking yourself, how can I make it a less overwhelming experience for someone, who has been owning this business for so long? So you want to ask them, where are they coming from primarily first with their issues which they may be feeling? Okay. Ask them why they feel that way. If there's a particular data point they have to share with you, and then try and explain to them what you're trying to do using data points, using your user research which you got, and then see how they react to that. If they still say that, hey, no, I think what I'm telling you is right, okay, at that point you can politely recommend doing something known as an A/B test. We basically compare both ideas and see who's most successful. Sometimes you actually notice the client is actually right and you're wrong, okay, and that's particularly because they have more domain expertise. So the thing is to be the friend of the client. Understand they're going to be slightly overwhelmed because you're suddenly coming in. They've owned the business for so long, so obviously they want to go ahead and ensure it's going to be correct because they don't want the business to be harmed. So I think that's really important, is understanding where the customer is coming from, where the client is coming from. So that's what I can tell you. Okay, does it answer your question? Okay, there's another question which came in, which was, do you code or like, okay, yes, I do know how to code. I primarily code in Python and R because I do data science a bit and data analytics and visual analytics. So I do code in R and Python. I also do know how to code in HTML and CSS and JavaScript. I rather not code anymore because I would rather design. And it's a great tool called Webflow, which I use, to design out most of my websites as well. It does all the coding for me. It's a no-code tool. So my short answer is yes, I know how to code. Do I code very often? No. Um, People ask me another question out here, which was primarily 100K a month. Who pays that? I think if I'm not wrong, Amazon is 95K a month starting salary. Microsoft is 105 and Google is 120K. Um, I'm not sure what Facebook's starting salary is, but I'm guessing it's going to be in the similar range. What's a design head of a company looking for in a junior product designer? Oh, this is a great question. They're looking for experience. Okay, that's the best answer. Because I helped so many people in the job hunting search. They're basically looking for some form of experience. Okay, that's why you'd actually heard me today say you want to help at least some small business owners, because what they want is someone who's been able to go ahead and use design in the industry itself rather than just for a school project or for a personal project. So if you're able to go ahead and show projects which you've actually done for even small clients, that is always appreciated. Do internships. Okay, that is a great way to build yourself up towards a full-time role. So that's primarily what a design head of a company is usually looking for, or a hiring manager per se. So go ahead and do small projects for a small a small business, like even a barber shop per se. You make a website for do it for a restaurant, do it even for like maybe your own father's or mother's website. That's a great place to get started with. In fact, a lot of my fellows in the Pathways program do that and make a very good impression and tend to get actually better salaries as well, because of the fact that they can show that they can handle an entire project by themselves and lead to good results. What topics have to be covered for grabbing an internship? I'm not sure what you mean by that. Monish, can you elaborate on the question and post it again? While you type that out, I'm going to just see the last few questions. Pulkit says, actually, I'm not getting clients since 4 months of start in freelancing platforms. Some do's and don'ts. Most of my fellows in the program actually don't get started, with the freelancing platforms. Upwork and Fiverr and freelancer.com, great sites, but usually just look around you, look in your own family, look in your own friend circle. Okay, go down the road, you will start to find people who will actually need websites. Like one great method I teach my fellows at Pathrise is I say, go on to Google reviews, okay, or on the Yelp reviews. They use Yelp in USA, okay, but out here I think at least I feel we tend to use Google and Zomato. Take a look at a restaurant's website, see if it is good, see if it's following all the best practices which some of the other websites are following. If it's not, call up the client, say, hey, I know you're not doing this, I can actually redesign your website for you. Okay, here are the best practices I could deploy, which could actually help you out. That's a great way to get clients, is go ahead and see who is not doing the best things. They'll usually immediately say yes. Okay, so that's a great way to start building out your portfolio. And then after that, once you have a stronger portfolio, then I think you'll get a lot more clients, on freelancer.com and fiverr.com. We're actually showing real world projects. I think they've asked us, personal branding matter for those who are starting in 2021 for getting good opportunities. I think branding matters. Yes, it does matter, but I learned a great story over the last 4 years in my own career, is that a visual brand can only take you so far. A brand matters more than just a logo and colors. And I think the best story for that is actually a club which I ran at the University of Washington. When we started off, we had not the best logo. There was a great design, club as well inside the university. And they actually had the best logo. Everything looked fantastic. Our posters were okay, they were not bad, but they were not the best poster you would see out there. And I was always jealous. I said, I wish I had that designer on me who was great with graphics. We would get more people. But actually, that did not result in us getting more people. And what really resulted in us getting more people was our consistency, our customer service, basically, of us going and actually helping people who came to us, and an actual event catalog of us doing a lot of events per se. That made people want to come back to our club, and that slowly the design club died out. And I still was always not sure why it happened. And when I actually spoke to the visual designer 2 years later, he said, you know what? I've also realized the same thing when I actually work today as an agency designer, is that my visual design skills can only take me so far. It's the actual work which the company does, okay, which actually defines their brand. And I think that really matters a lot. So visual design can take your brand so far, but at the end of the day, I feel the work which you do also matters. Okay, so if you're not doing good work, your brand will die. So I think you want to focus on doing good work and keeping your relationship strong, whoever the relationship with is, that will build belief and trust in your brand. Okay, like there are so many great restaurants around Mumbai which don't have not done a rebrand in the past so many years. How are they still successful brands? It's because they have great products, okay, and great service. That's also what really defines a good brand. Okay, so that's what I would even recommend for personal branding is you should go ahead and make a nice logo. I'm not saying don't make a bad logo, but it will only take you so far. You also want to focus on what you actually do as a person. Are you delivering results? Are you having good relationships? That will define your personal branding a lot more. Okay, Dev? Okay. So I'm seeing another question from Shivani. How does one without any design background or from an IT background precisely get started? Any courses that complement the background? I think I came from an IT background. I didn't share that too much, but in school, I was an average student. I was nowhere close to the toppers. I was always getting 75%. Fortunately, I got a bit better in my ICSE boards. I got 84. I'm very transparent about that. And I was only good at two subjects, math and IT. Okay. And even until the 12th grade, that was primarily what my focus was. I always knew how to use a computer. I could pick up softwares really easily. And what got me started was what I shared with you today, right? Basically, going ahead, maybe taking a course, but also then gathering information from other places. So, as I said, like I made Medium by best friend, reading a lot of articles. I didn't have a capacity for a book. Today, I have a capacity for reading books. I feel a lot more comfortable. But at that time, I was just using articles and doing a lot of projects. Like, I'll just share that slide deck again. Go back to the top. In that course which I took, the teacher actually made us design 14 apps. I only showed 4 out here. Okay, if I showed all 14, maybe your trust in me would immediately go ahead and go down immediately per se. But we made 14 ugly apps. I won't deny that. Okay, they were not even functional. The usability was terrible. With time, we were able to make them at least better. But that actually helped me out. I became really comfortable with the UI design tools. Okay, I was using I think Adobe XD at the start. Okay, and that made me really comfortable. But then I did more and more projects, and it's only doing more projects which makes me, like, a better designer. So do more projects. Okay, read up, start to apply what you're reading. There's always going to be more to learn. As I said, even as I go into different companies, I learn a new skill. Okay, and it feels very odd to not know everything at the start, but as you begin to move forward, you begin to realize you don't need to know everything to be, have value to an organization. You just need to go ahead and make a conscientious effort to go and apply what you're learning, and not just go ahead and read it and then forget about it. So apply what you learn through an article or through a book into your actual projects. Do a lot of projects, okay? And quality projects. When I say projects, I mean to say invest good time into it. Don't just spend 1 hour and think it's going to be fantastic. You need to invest a sufficient amount of time for a project, to have value to it and value to your own learning experience. So it's 7:32. I'll answer a few more questions. I'm not sure when I'm supposed to end. Let me just ask the Avalon team. Is there any given time which we have to end at, Team Avalon?
No, Zoshua. It's 7:30. I think you can take a couple more questions and we can wrap things up.
Cool. So I see 4 more questions. I'll go ahead and pick out the most important 2 per se. Arishi asks, why did I choose design instead of IT? I never considered design as, I was leaving IT when I was doing design. I primarily consider it as a skill set in my IT career. Okay. And I don't think of IT as just IT. I think of technology as the field which I want to use per se, or as a tool or skill, whatever you want to call it. Okay. As a medium for me to help people. So this kind of ties into what Preet also asked, which is what do I plan to do in the next 5 to 10 years with regards to design? So 2 things which I know for sure. I'll be focusing primarily on helping small to medium-sized businesses, usually in my career, okay, and enabling them, to become digitally empowered. And I think that's primarily your businesses in India are not digitally empowered. Okay, if you just go and walk down the street, there's a lot of potential for a lot of digital solutions and systems to become of value to an organization. It doesn't just always have to be by you designing a great product. Sometimes it's just about using an existing product and giving value and modifying it slightly to add value to an organization. So I don't just think of design as one way to solve a problem. There's also sometimes just analytics. That's why I also have a career in analytics as well. I actually do teach analytics. I teach business analytics specifically. using Power BI and Tableau. So I have learned any skill which is out there. If I know I can use it to help people and I'm interested enough in it, I will grab that skill. And that's why even when I teach, I tell everyone the same way, like, you don't always have to design a brand new app or a brand new website. If there's something existing out there, sometimes you can solve the problem faster. You just need to use your, design thinking skills to know that, okay, I don't need to make something from scratch. Why don't we repurpose this and it can actually help us? For example, today what I showed you for Pathrise, initially when we got started off with, just to validate our ideas, we actually used an existing solution called Coda, and that first got us, some validation. We saw that it was working well. Only then did we actually decide to move it forward. Okay, so you don't always have to start off with a solution of designing something from scratch. You can start off by making small prototypes as well. And that's primarily what I want to do. That's the first thing, is like focus on helping small to medium-sized businesses. And then primarily my second thing which I want to do is always focus on design education. I've been doing it since 2017. I don't intend on stopping. The medium through which I deliver it may change, may not change. I've been teaching lectures. I enjoy teaching lectures, but I've always considered, going ahead and making an online version of myself, basically, which people can view at any given point of time. I'm not sure how that will translate in the future, but it is something I've considered. So I know I'll be in design education and helping small to medium-sized businesses. That's why you always see I'm working with startups, okay, and not with the larger organizations. Anyone else? I see primarily the last question of the day. It's from Hampreet, which is, companies care about your education qualifications if you have amazing, do companies care about your education qualifications if you have amazing and strong skills? I think your portfolio does all the talking. I have seen people who have had, just coming out of small boot camps where they spend 2-3 months, people who had no real design experience, who didn't even like go to university to study design, who've got jobs in the field of UX. So I don't think that you have to have strong education qualifications, to get a job. Yes, it can help you in some ways, but if you have a good portfolio and if you brand yourself well and you help people and you create an impact, there's no way someone's going to say no to you. Okay. You will see that very often, especially with the field of UX design, because it's such a young field and there's just so much demand for it that you need UX design. You need UX designers faster. You can't wait for someone to be in a 4-year program and then graduate each time. That's why UX bootcamps also go between 3 months to 1 year. Okay. So that's something which I want to inform you of, is that you don't always, have to have the best education qualifications, go to the best design school. No. As long as you go ahead and make a good portfolio, do projects, learn in whichever way you appreciate, you will, at the end of the day, get a lot of attention and you'll have people who value you. Okay. Last question of the day, I'll answer this. This is a funny one, so I'll end it out here. How do I take care of my eyes when design needs too much of screen time? So I agree. I get tired of looking at screen pretty often, especially since I teach. I'm in meetings and I'm looking at the screen. So when that happens, I go ahead and shut the laptop screen and I turn to my next best friend, which is paper, and actually happen to draw a lot on paper. I'm going to pull out the papers from here. Let's see if I can pull out a few. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to pull these out for the time being. I can't find any more, but basically I then shift to paper. Okay, and I start to draw out on paper. I'll message, my PM as well, be like, hey, today I'm going to be drawing my ideas out on paper and we can discuss them and we can convert them into visual design prototypes, maybe sometime later in the week, because I'm really tired. And most of the time it's not my eyes, it's my hand which gets hurt, because at the end of the day, if your hand's continuously like on the mouse trackpad, like continuously working on a design tool, it can pain a lot. So this part of my hand tends to pain sometimes, but that's, part of the job, right? Like each job has its own pains per se. So that's part of the pain which I feel. But I like draw on paper. I read books sometimes, very rarely. I wouldn't say I'm a very avid reader, but yeah, that's how I take care of my, screen time per se. But I'm very guilty. I think if you pull up my screen time, it may say 10 to 11 hours a day on a laptop. But that's due to the pandemic as well, I feel. Anyone else?
Awesome.
Okay.
All right.
Great.
Awesome, Zoshua. I think everyone loved the session. It's like I was hooked from the beginning. Just a couple of things. Again, I'm just reiterating this. I think Zoshua has already shared his LinkedIn. Do you have your Instagram ready? Do you
Yeah,
have
you
that?
can follow me on Zoshua Colah. You can follow me out there.
Yeah. So I think like you guys should just just reach out to him either through DM or on his LinkedIn or wherever, and just give him like either a thumbs up or a thumbs down, even if
Yep.
you don't like it. But I mean, I'm pretty sure, the thing is, like, Joshua is like a really experienced mentor, so he knows it, that he would, criticism is one of the things that he would actually appreciate. If you didn't like the session, let him know. But if you love the session, do give him a thumbs up, a pat on the back, and or maybe a hug, and like, thank you. That's something that most mentors really appreciate. So I think that's due from our end.
Mhm.
Anything else you want to say, Josh, before we shut down?
No, I just saw a message asking, can I share the slides? Yes, I'll share the slides with you. Just give me 1 second. I'll create a viewable link. And I'll also share it on Discord as well, so y'all can see it. I'm not sure which channel I'll share it in, but I'll put it on Discord. I
You,
think
you can
there's
give it to
a,
me. You
pardon?
can give it to me. You can give it to me, and I'll tag everyone, so then they'll all get it.
Perfect. And I may just remove 1 or 2 slides related to work. So I'll just remove those, but the remaining things can be seen. Okay? Perfect. So I'll just go ahead and share it in the, oops, seems like I can't share it in the chat. 1 second. Okay. I've done my best to go ahead and share it in the chat. Hope it works. If it doesn't work, we'll find some way for it to reach out to you all on Discord. Okay? Cool? Awesome. It's great speaking with all of y'all. Okay. If you have any questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love feedback. Okay. So do not feel bad, if you're reaching out to me and saying, hey, Zosh, I didn't like the session, or it was too fast, or it was too slow. I wish you had a bit more interaction, or this part was confusing. Let me know. I love gathering feedback. Okay. In fact, I use my analytics tool always to go in and figure out where I went wrong. So do share it. So that way I know exactly what needs to change. Okay. Cool. Awesome. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
Bye, guys. Have a great weekend.